You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Batuta Advocate, on Desert Rock FM. Welcome back to the Batuta Advocate radio show, recording live here in downtown Batuta. Now today we are talking to a journalist, a podcaster, a great investigator, and someone who's actually been looking into something that I find quite interesting personally. I don't know about you, Errol, but cults. What do you know about them?
Well, I know that like most terrible things in this country, they happen in the more southern portion. I mean, as we've seen down south, especially in Melbourne and in parts of regional Victoria and in parts of regional New South Wales, we've seen plagues, pox has been put amongst people. We've seen terrible floods. Mm-hmm. And out here in Western Queensland, we've just had nothing but beautiful sunshine.
It is true, but we're not far. We start getting down to that New England. Of course, you cross the New South Wales border. You start getting down to New England, you start kind of running into those exclusive brethrens and those other kind of Cornish and Celtic old religions. You know, the sign riders? What are they called? The blokes that do all the stonemasonry down there on the New England highway.
The Freemasons.
Yeah, no, there's another mob down there. They're Barnaby's most loyal booth, actually. And they keep to themselves. They educate themselves, and I'm not sure.
The Amish.
The Amish?
No, not the Amish.
Yeah, it's a similar kind of brand.
Handmaid's Tale.
Handmaid's Tale, yeah. There's a few of them. And
the Brethren.
The exclusive Brethrens.
Yeah. Well, you know, they go to hospital when they have children. You know, they do have, you know, a certain tolerance for modern medicine.
We shouldn't discount that North Queensland had its own history of communes. You know, particularly during that Jonestown era, you know, back when cults were really the thing, pre-internet, as we'll get into today.
Bjelke Peterson.
Yeah. Well, I guess
he was a cult.
That was a cult itself. Joe for PM.
Yeah.
Yep.
What was his wife's name? Flo.
Joan Flo.
She could have been a cult
Lady
leader.
Flo.
Lady Flo. She invented fizzy. Would you believe that?
She also had pumpkin scones.
Yes, she was an incredible hostess.
Amazing woman.
We should get into introducing you now. I've been riffing here a little bit about my limited knowledge of cults. A man who has much more insight than the rest of us, and indeed our last cultist guest, Tom Tilley, who's in the scheme of things experience was quite sterilised compared
Very
to what you've dug into here. Thank you for joining us today, Tim Elliott.
Thank you, Clancy. Thank you, Errol. Thanks for having me.
Let's start from the beginning. I mean, we'll start off with the name of your true crime podcast. Like, it's true crime.
It's true crime, yeah. It's called Inside the Tribe.
And where did you first stumble across this tribe?
Okay, this particular tribe. Well, actually, there's 12 of the tribes. Their name is the 12 Tribes. So it's one group called 12 Tribes. Confusing, but they're a worldwide cult, and there's about... They're sort of in 9 countries around the world, everywhere from Brazil to Argentina to Spain, Germany, all over the shop. Mm-hmm. But I first came across them because this guy got in touch with me ages ago, like 2008, when I work at the Sydney Morning Herald. And he phoned up saying, I've got this... I think I'd written a story about a deprogrammer, which is someone who takes people out of a cult. Mm-hmm. So they sort of pull them out, help them escape, essentially.
Bounty hunter, basically, for concerned families.
A bounty hunter for concerned families, exactly. And then after that came out, this guy called me and said, "Oh my God, I've got this incredible story. I was in this cult. It was crazy. I lost my wife through it. She's still in there. It was a nightmare, etc., etc." So he had been part of the 12 Tribes. That's how I came across the 12 Tribes. And then ever since there, I've been kind of following them.
So you kind of just filed that story, deprogrammer, 12 Tribes. There's a bloke who's out of the game. And then they just keep kind of popping up in your life.
They keep on popping up. They can't leave me alone. No, well, I got basically people just kept getting in touch and saying, yeah, well, actually Matt, the guy who I talked to originally, said about 10 years after I talked to him, got in touch again and said, "Oh my God, I've got this story. You thought my story was screwed up. I've got this Sydney couple who joined in the mid-90s and spent 13 years in the group and just had a kid in there, took 2 young kids in there, lost their minds, got treated like slaves, abused, shuttled all around the world when their family was trying to find them. There were kids dying, stillbirths. Their story was freaking unbelievable."
Now, Tim, you're an esteemed long-form journalist, very long career working in the places like, as you did mention, the Glebe Morning Herald and their weekend, lift out the Great Weekend. What made you decide to turn this this story of the 12 tribes into a podcast series?
What made me decide to do it? Because I thought it'd make a really good podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there just
As
too much to
opposed
fit
to-
in as well? Like, I mean,
There was so much material, yeah.
Yeah.
So I met someone who makes really good podcasts, not like me, who's got no freaking idea what they're doing with the podcast. And she said, "Oh, that story, I read that story by you from ages ago. Why don't we do a podcast about it?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." And you're right. Yeah, like there's so much material. It started going, and there was covering that story. Rose and Mark's story was fine and good, and that story kind of took us a long way down the track, but then all this other stuff popped up from overseas, all these other crimes and misdemeanors and horrendous, fascinating stuff.
Which kind of reaffirms the true crime element of it. You know, it could be listed in the religion, spirituality, or just, you know, Aussie drama or Australian storytelling. But it is true crime, and I think it quite often is when you scrape the surface of this kind of movement. Can you tell me where the 12 tribes, where would their stronghold be?
Okay.
In this country?
They have a little community out in Picton,
Yep.
so on the outskirts of Sydney. Mm-hmm. And they have a lovely farm there, actually. It's a really lovely farm called Peppercorn Creek Farm. And I went out there to talk to him. They weren't too keen on talking to me. But I did see the farm, and it's stunning. Like, it's really, you know, hills, the lush green hills, and a little creek running through it. And they've got some sort of sheds there and places where they live, and it's really cool, you know, except the trouble is that they're just a really hardcore fundamentalist Christian sect that practices really brutal child discipline and mind control.
I have been listening to your your teasers that you've provided us with, and one thing I found quite interesting was it did feel like they were very, very well versed in the Old Testament.
Yeah, they're right on the Old Testament.
Yeah. So this group's, they're rooted in more or less the Judeo-Christian teachings of the Bible,
Yeah.
as opposed to, you know, the new, more progressive people in the Bible like John and the Apostle Paul.
Yeah, they're super old school, yes. They believe that. So what they want to do is get rid of the leader who was around in the 70s, who started this whole group in the 70s, a guy called Eugene Spriggs, who had a really fascinating sort of story himself,
Yeah.
bit of a kook.
He was a
total kook.
carny, wasn't he?
Yeah, he worked at carnivals,
Yeah.
and he joined the army, he got married 3 times and divorced 3 times,
Oh,
and then had a
sorry.
breakdown.
In
And
this country, they're called showies.
showies.
But this was obviously over
This
in...
was in the state, Chattanooga. He lived
Chattanooga.
in. His whole thing was he wanted to get rid of mainstream church, like established church, just get that right out of the picture, get down to tin tacks with, you know, how it was when the first bunch of disciples were wandering around in the desert in the first century after Christ, right? Mm-hmm. So they didn't have any churches and scriptures, or they didn't have any sort of written stuff. They were just basically bumbling around, supporting one another and talking about God, right? So that's how he wanted it to be. And then he just sort of pared back the cult until it got really, really fundamentalist. They basically follow, it's sort of a mix between the Jewish and the Christian beliefs, and it's really, some of their theology is really messed up. Like, their whole mission is to raise, they want to bring on the end of the world by raising 144,000 purebred male baby warriors, right?
Okay.
That can go out, are going to go out during Armageddon and wage war on Satan and win.
Okay.
So around the world, they're steadily building up this army of pure male children. So it's a very scary kind of end of the world, kooky bunch of people, but it's also really dangerous because they really believe
Yep.
that the world's going to end and they're going to be a part of it. And they have this small group of really quite well-financed followers willing to go all the way.
So that's what I wanted to talk about, is that there's the well-financed element. I mean, we talk about the mix of Judaism and Christian. I noticed the family that you kind of first got in contact with, the couple there, the Kiwis,
Yeah.
were given Hebrew names.
Yeah, they're all when you join, you're all given a new name, a new
Yeah.
identity, a new set of clothes. Basically, it's full on. You are just withdrawn from society. That's it. You just cut off all ties.
It's an interesting recruitment tool. If you've got someone whose foot's in the door And then to do that to them, if they're in a low, which these people had, explained that they were having a kind of lull in their life.
Yeah, they were in between. They were kind of vulnerable.
It's a great rebrand, and I think it's at that moment when you do something like, here's your new name, this is how you're going to dress now, this is your community. But then something happens where they start asking them about their assets.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to ask. Is this why they're well-funded? Because anyone who comes there with whatever they bring becomes part of the church?
Yeah. Part of it is that when you sign on, when you join, and you don't join immediately, it's really interesting. Like no one joins a cult and they go, I'm going to go out and I wake up this morning and I'm going to join a bunch of people who will manipulate my mind, beat my children and ruin my life. Yeah. Like, you go, I'm going to join this bunch of people who look like a really cool bunch of people who can live in community and nature, and they provide for one another, and it's all beautiful. And then once you're in for a while, like about a year, shit starts to go really weird, and you learn about the kind of the inner doctrine, and that's how by that time you're kind of well and truly in.
And you've lost everything to them.
Yeah, you've
given everything to them.
You've given, when you join up, you surrender your possessions. If you have a car, you give it to them.
They're asking about super.
And they do. They're quite... And one of the guys I spoke to, Mark, was like, had a stake in a property in Queensland. And they were like, oh, what can we do about that property you've got up in Queensland? And then he ended up selling out. And it was about $8,000 away from owning this thing. And he just gave it basically to the other guys and said, don't want to be a part of that. And he just looks back and goes, oh my God, I can't believe that.
He did say it was Sunshine Coast.
Yeah, that block of land's probably a big hotel now. Housing estate.
Tell us what you learned about cults. What did you learn about them in this, this investigation? Because no one really knows what it is. They've existed for eternity, but no one really knows what it is that, as a society, we can never seem to rid ourselves of them. What do you think?
Because people are really like, everybody, I reckon, at some stage in their lives would be, like, how everybody's like, I'm way too smart to be join a cult, freaking idiots to join a cult, why would you do that? But everybody in their lives, at some stage in their lives, is vulnerable enough for a certain period of time to fall into one of these things, to fall down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes at the innate human need to belong.
Yeah, it's all about belonging. Yeah. And these guys, Mark and Rose, they come back from Europe, the mid-90s. They're sort of trying to settle back in. She was Spanish, he's a Kiwi, but they were living in Sydney. They're trying to reconnect with old friends, trying to get a job, etc. And one day,
what was the
trying
call
to find
action?
A school for their kids. They had 2 kids. So they're all a bit like, what's going to happen? Like we're just settling back in. And then Mark went to a festival in Newtown, and he was walking around, and this woman in long flowing cotton dress with a headscarf on came up and said, looks like you need a home, to him. And he was thinking, and he looks back and he goes, I did. And she spotted it like straight off the bat. She knew exactly how to get him. And she gave him a pamphlet talking about the 12 tribes. And he was like, wow, this makes a lot of sense, So, everybody's vulnerable in that way at some stage in their life. But also, all these guys did was they were just they were idealistic. Mm-hmm. So that wasn't a crime. All they wanted to do was live a better way.
Yeah. Well, that's what they were met with when they first kind of got involved.
Yeah, you go there and they put on, it's the Disney face of the 12 tribes. It's all rainbows and dolphins. And
why can't it be just that, do you think?
That's a really good question. Why can't it be? Well, it started that way. Maybe this is just the way of all things. So it started
power corrupts.
Power. Well, it does. I think that's what it is. Yeah. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. And this guy at the top started in the 72, this group, just as a bunch of young Christians in a room in Chattanooga in Tennessee, singing songs and talking about God and providing support for one another. And it was really innocent and nice. And then it sort of morphed over the years into this really bizarre, ritualistic theology that totally subjectifies women and severely disciplines children and believes in the end of the world. How exactly it became like that is a whole combination of stuff. Eugene Spriggs, the founder, I reckon was kind of going a bit mad.
Yep.
His followers also wanted to please him. That they really wanted to please him. So let's be purer than the next guy. Let's show, Eugene, how devout we are. You know, so that his teachings tell me to beat my kid. Well, I'm going to really, really beat the crap out of my kid. You know, it's to show the next person.
Yeah, there's
I'm a really-
inherent competitiveness. And in Tom Tilley, we spoke to Tom Tilley about his book, Speaking in Tongues, and he said that was one thing with the kids, even though speaking in tongues, which was the, you know, kind of the base of his religion, that's what it was all based around, the one he grew up in, the particular sect he grew up in outside of Mudgee. He said the kids would then try and impress as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So the kids would, I just spoke tongues down by the creek for the first time. No one will ever know if that was true or not,
Yeah.
but it's celebrated either way.
Yeah,
and then,
yeah.
you know, there's other kids getting jealous, and then everyone starts playing into this thing.
Oh, they buy in.
Yeah.
You know, and they start to, one of the really sinister bits that we explore in the podcast is that when Mark and Rose went in, the whole podcast is basically about their narrative and how the journey they went through in this really horrific journey. And when they first went in, they were really in love. Mm-hmm. And it's really sweet, and they still are. Like when we went out and talked to them and met them again, I was like, wow, these guys are really like so still in love. It was really beautiful. But after a while, what had happened was it's sort of the demands of the group and the desire to please, like you're talking about, saw them start to inform on one another. It was really creepy. So they started to tell the elders, oh, you know, Mark's not beating the children hard enough. What should I do? You know? And then Mark would go, Rose doesn't cook the food the way that you're saying she should. And then it all got really sinister, and so it sort of almost broke them up. And the really amazing way they came back together, it's incredible.
Yeah, well, I'm interested to hear that. And we won't spoil that particular love story because I don't think there's too many fond memories in the story. But did you find that with any ex-members? Do they look back with rose-coloured glasses at the good times?
I reckon. Well, we're really at pains to, and I really want to point out, because people are always like, oh, journalists are always, you know, bashing these groups. But actually, as Mark and Rose told me, and as quite a few of the people told me, former members, there was plenty to like about the group. Like it was at the beginning certainly a really utopian lifestyle. They farmed, they grew all their own food. Everything they had was pulled together. They looked after one another's kids. They felt safe, supported. Mm-hmm. They didn't want for anything. It wasn't like there was this horrible rat race out in the normal world that you're taking part in. And they made great friends, you know, and they found belonging. And so there was an element of that. But no, most of the people who left for a really good reason.
Not because the times were too good.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask, because it's not necessarily illegal to join a cult, especially in New South Wales. So what was it that brought 12 tribes to the attention of the New South Wales police?
Well, there'd been rumours about the 12 tribes for ages. One of the reasons I started looking back into them was because I got a call from a woman in the Blue Mountains who we don't name, but she called me and said, there's this group up here and they're so creepy, and I've heard about them having a lot of stillbirths. Like they have an unusually large amount of kids who die during birth, and then they bury them in the bush.
Right.
And it's like, it's really freaky. And
there's no documentation. There's
it's like it's totally illegal.
Yeah.
And so she started to talk to people around in the Blue Mountains, and other people were like, oh yeah, but this group, the 12 tribes, they have this beautiful cafe called Common Sense, and they're really lovely.
I've heard about these people, and they do lovely tea.
They do lovely teas, and the food's so nice.
It's the Yellow Deli just off the highway there.
Yeah. And so she was like, but no, these guys, it's really creepy, and there's something majorly wrong.
Yeah.
So she called me and said, I've heard about another baby dying during childbirth and being buried out in the bush. You've got to look back in this group. So that's why I did it. And that's the same reason the cops are now looking into them, because there are babies' bodies buried on their properties.
Do you find, I mean, aside from obviously this brand of Christianity that most people who have any semblance of, you know, kind of religion would be unfamiliar with, the Old Testament, you know, even in the most Christian schools in Australia, they don't read a lot of that. But there's other things I saw, and particularly that family, you know, you open with, everything seems lovey-dovey, and all these, like, you know, the men go and work and do manual labour in the farm, women go and do the domestic duties, and, you know, the kids play, and then they all gather for screaming sessions. What was this? Can you explain a bit about this?
It's kind of like a ecstatic purging, I think, at the end of the day. They are bearing of their souls at the end of the workday. So I think it was a big part of it as well. That was another communal element of this.
They'll sit there and scream.
And they'll get together at the end of the day and let rip. And I think they don't necessarily do it every day. I remember Mark and Rose saying, it was weird, when they first moved in. But then after a while, they were like, it's actually quite good.
Yeah.
They quite enjoyed it because they were blowing steam off and they were working really hard.
Are they making money off the agricultural practices, or is this purely about maintenance? Is this purely about just being at work?
Oh, no. They make lots of money.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. The 12 tribes around the world are a money-making machine.
Yeah.
And so it's not just from what I said, like taking the assets of new members.
No. Oh, God, no.
They have
cafes, restaurants, building companies, construction businesses, all sorts of stuff. A farm in Brazil. They got heaps of stuff going on. Yeah, they make a lot of money. And they particularly make a lot of money because they don't pay their workers anything.
Yeah.
So, in other words, it's slavery.
Yeah.
But again, these people do it. The members all work there. The 12 tribes members work in these businesses for free. They don't get paid a cent. They never see a cent.
Are they a registered religious organisation?
Non-for-profit, all that stuff. Yeah.
So they're not paying any mush to it.
No.
They wouldn't be doing much on land rates either, I don't reckon. It'd be a religious temple or...
Yeah, I think that they've got it. I mean, in Australia, the whole business has been reworked into a trust, discretionary trust. So it's very difficult to know what the hell's going on.
Did you find much sniffing around of you as you started sniffing around? Or were you just met with a brick wall?
I met with a brick wall. I mean, they believe that everything outside the 12 tribes is stained.
Okay.
And too worldly of this world, and you're not meant to care about this world. Okay. It's all about God's world.
They don't care about bad PR. It's not like Hillsong who have lawyers and Scientology who have lawyers.
And a private army to come and cut your legs off.
Yeah.
No. 12 tribes make Hillsong look very mild theologically.
Yeah.
These guys really, they've bought into it, and they don't believe that. They don't read magazines, radio, TV, nothing. They don't play games. They don't deal with money. They don't vote. They don't go to hospitals on the whole, unless someone's really dying.
Yeah.
But they don't believe any of that. They believe that the modern world is tainted. And
so how do these kids exist?
They're all homeschooled.
All homeschooled. So they really won't ever know otherwise, unless, they walk up to the fence gate when no one's looking one day and see... a motor vehicle.
It's hard. I think it must be really hard for the kids. And I think actually the group's going to start to fall apart. And I think to an extent it's already falling apart here. It used to be bigger in Australia. It used to be about 140 people and now it's about 70. Yeah. And I think it's just inevitable that the kids... It's impossible now to keep kids in the dark.
Yeah.
They will find out something.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you take them to work in the cafe. Mm-hmm. Like if they go to Blue Mountains and they're working in the cafe, which they do, then they go, hold on, all these other normal people coming in. They look really happy and cool and they're all on their phones.
These kids get to play with tablets. And
and they're doing this cool stuff and I have to go back and pull up turnips and get my ass smacked.
Yeah.
What?
The discipline thing, I mean, everything still seems quite lovey-dovey, really. If you want to talk about a utopia, you're not paying tax, you're not voting. You're running around in a meadow all day long and you have nothing to do with the outside world. That does sound like a utopia.
Yeah. And the only cost you have to bear is the occasional heavy flogging.
Yeah. Well, that's what I want to know is what do you think it is about this disciplining of children? Do you think that stems back to issues related to the founder or...
Yeah, no, I'll explain why.
Yeah.
Because you know how I said about the 144,000 pure male children?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So they have to be without sin. Right. So pure, morally pure.
Oh, so it wasn't like a Christian...
no, this has a really clear reason, right? So they're raising these children as this pure army of boy warriors, right? And it's up to them 12 tribes is going to raise this massive army. So the kids have to be raised so strictly to obey every rule, every commandment, never sin, never break the rules. So if they do...
Never lie.
Never lie. And if they do, never to get distracted by foolish things. They call it foolishness.
Yep.
So children's games are foolishness.
All right.
And it's so sad. Like there was one girl I talked to in there, one woman who, as a girl, didn't have any toys because I don't believe in toys. So she used to play dolls with a sock, her dad's sock, and sort of get the sock talking. Right? It's like, sort of made me want to cry.
Yeah.
And so it's all about, if you're raising a pure army of people, then you got to treat them, you got to beat the sin out of them.
Did they get a look in at this Royal Commission into institutional responses, or they exist below that?
They are out of the picture.
Yeah, right.
And it's just disgraceful. I got no idea. One thing is that, okay, so with the Catholic Church and the Anglicans or whatever, the people who took part in that, who were targeted in that, the Royal Commission, there were lots of people willing to come forward and say, okay, it was terrible, this happened, blah, blah, blah. With the 12 tribes, by the time these guys get out, in my experience, they're so used up and exhausted. Physically, psychologically, they're broke, they have nothing. Just restarting their lives from scratch is about all they can manage. So, they're just not up to it. Like I talked to one kid, I said, you've got to file a fair work claim. Yeah. And he's like, how am I going to prove it? I don't understand the system. I don't have the energy for it. I'm just trying to get my head together. He's a real mess.
Tell me the excommunication aspect. Is it like those other kind of culture you hear about where, dad might get an idea that this isn't all it's cracked up to be. Dad wants the family out, and then mum and the kids decide they want to stay. They don't ever talk again?
They never talk again. Yeah. That's also a really full-on traumatic, sad element that there were quite a few people I talked to and a few people we focus on who's haven't seen their own mothers for 20 years.
Right.
Haven't seen their daughters, don't know where they are, think they're in a certain place, but they won't respond. The tribes won't tell them where they are. It's just, I don't know. I'm a parent that would really rip your guts out, having your kid disappear. And so one girl I was talking to was like, why did mum choose this group of people over me? And it took her, she's just severely disturbed.
Yeah.
It's like, well, why the frick did my mum walk out on me to join this group of people? What about me? What was wrong with me?
Yeah.
And now she can't even find her. So it's kind of a form of death.
Yeah. I just don't understand how we have this church, and this is all, credit to you for taking the moment to zone in on this church and piece together what's happening. I won't say church because they definitely don't think they're one. They're a cult that exists in however many countries around the world, multi-million-dollar operation, perhaps $1 billion if you really...
Yeah, they've got properties all around the world. They've got farms. They've got luxury yachts. Yeah, it's incredible.
They don't really seem to care too much about their outward PR.
Yeah.
How come we've never heard of this? Like, I've never heard of this. I've heard of, the Orange people in Oregon. I've heard of Waco, Jonestown. I've even heard of some of those, Opus Dei types running around Goulburn and the like. But 12 tribes have never really gotten a look in. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because...
No idea.
Yeah, do you think they're
weird.
a bit too wholesome on the...
Because they present maybe it's because they do present this really wholesome facade, or maybe it's because people have traditionally been really unwilling to talk about them because they do lose contact with their family members. They will be taken away from the cutoff. Maybe it's because they're spread out all over the world. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's a really good question, but I think it's going to change.
Did you find yourself being blown away? Like, obviously you knew there was a story there before you... how many episodes did you...
There's 9 episodes. 9
episodes you pieced together.
And there's going to be we were looking at there's another bunch of episodes. Yeah. It's unbelievable, the other stuff. We just couldn't get into the narrative because we wanted to make it like a proper story, starts here,
Yeah.
And then that happened, and then this happened.
You can't really be like, and then this day I discovered this, and then this day...
It's like we're telling a proper story because I love telling stories, once upon a time, and then this crazy thing happened, and then that happened, and then it ended up like this, and then that happened. And by the time you've got that in and I don't know, there's just so much more material out there.
Yeah, like I'm having a look at the 12 tribes yacht here now. It isn't like a yacht that you'd see on the harbour. Like, this is a world going. Like, it's got 2 giant masts. It displaces 400 tons, which is on par with like a naval cruiser.
And the really interesting thing about that boat is they use that boat in the States to sail up and down the Gulf Coast, evangelizing.
Okay.
So that, yeah, it's really interesting. So they just pop into this and that town and hop off.
Myrtle Beach.
Yeah, and just hop off and go into the centre of town and start handing out pamphlets.
Atlantic
and
City.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that need saving down that part of the world. And I mean, I guess that would, because I mean, at the end of the day, that's the one thing we've found with this modern cult in this day and age is aspirational is now the pitch, right?
Yeah.
Once upon a time, it was come and join our religious movement and punish yourself, because we will punish you and you will repent, and we're the best at that. And nowadays, it's like, compare the two. That's Dominic Perrottet. Dominic Perrottet is the punish yourself Catholic.
The Opus Dei, yeah.
And Scott Morrison is the aspirational Christian. And
So, yeah.
there's two different types, and I do think a yacht is going to be, in this day and age, going to be doing a lot more.
It's got to be it's again a great recruiting tool. Yeah.
Rather than seeing some poor Amish guy on with a horse and cart, you're going to actually be a bit more invested in what
It
has
isn't as
brought
big
these
as the
people about.
Scientology ship, though. That one's massive.
They've got a way to go.
That's an old cruise liner, that one.
They've got a way to go.
Yeah, I mean, everyone, there is a reckoning happening for all of them, really. I mean, they've all started looking into what happened to the head of Scientology's wife, who's just been missing for all these years.
Yeah.
And it is a thing about when you...
Has she popped up yet?
No, she hasn't popped up. They don't know where she is. And obviously the fall from grace of Brian Houston is happening before us right now.
Yeah.
Kind of timed well with Morrison and Houston. They all start going down.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the leader of the 12 tribes, Yonek, which was his cult name, or Eugene Spriggs, he died last year of COVID.
Oh, really?
So it's a really heavy time for them. So like, oh my God, that freaked them out.
So this is only basically a generation that this has popped up.
Yeah.
So the founder
started
died
in 72 as a sort of a 30-year-old, and he just died last year. They think of COVID, but...
Well, they won't tell them that.
No. It's too worldly.
Because they were a bit more medically skeptical than most of us.
Yeah.
Have you received any blowback? Or if you haven't, do you anticipate to receive any from this group?
I don't anticipate receiving blowback from them, because they'd go, oh, well, he's going to burn in the lake of fire. Yep. That's all we care about. We don't care about him. What will happen is a lot of people will get in touch. Mm-hmm. From Germany, the States, England, France, Spain, all of them they'll hear about it, because we've spoken to people all around the world, and then
I mean, this is a call out now for anyone, really. I mean, every single moment is a call out now.
So that's what I expect.
Tim's emails are open for you.
Send it in. So I believe, that's going to happen for sure.
Yeah.
I've been looking at there's a website that's got so much. It's like an archive of info on this tribe, and for every news article that's posted there's just the comments are full top to bottom with like, oh, these poor people. I was in there for 26 years, and then there's another one down there. It's like, I was in there for 10 years. It's almost like more people have left than what's in it. Really.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. I think that site is incredible.
Yeah,
and that shows how big the group is really, and how not big numerically, but how their reach and the grip they have on people. It's really the mind control they exert, the level of control they exert. And so when people leave, they're just the awakening that people have. So they start these sites like, oh my God, get out of the group. And,
You do a good job of explaining how people found God, how people found the 12 tribes. Throughout your podcast, do you have any example of people finding Satan? I love hearing that story when they decided, the first time they walked into a pub after leaving the church and realised that you could just sit here and watch foolish games on the TV screen and drink schooners all day.
That's really interesting, because one of the stories and one of the reason a guy left who we talked to, one of the main characters, he was in Canada, and the cult had taken him to Canada because he was a chemical scientist, chemical engineer. So he wasn't a stupid guy, and he still joined them. So he was over there working for them, but he got all disaffected and was sort of thinking about leaving. And they allowed him to go and spend time with his parents, with his mother, which was the big mistake the cult made. And so he went with his mother to the zoo. I think it was in Winnipeg. And they walked in there and there was no one in the zoo. Like, the place was not a soul. And they were thinking, this feels a bit weird. And then they went into the gift shop and they looked up at the TV, and it was the 11th of September, 2001.
Right.
And they were the planes
Yeah.
flying into the towers. And Matt, the cult guy was in the cult, was, what's happening?
They let me up for one day, and I can see how awful this place is.
Yeah, I can see how bad this screwed up shit is out here. And so he was like, yeah, the world's a pretty messed up place. But at the same time, so then he went back in. He went back into the cult, into the community. And by this time, he's really all messed up. He's like, I should leave. I shouldn't leave. I should leave. I shouldn't leave. And they sat down at one of the meetings that night. And one of the elders said, we've got to be more like, because news filtered through to the community that this had happened. They couldn't keep that news out. And one of them said, we need to be more like the members of the 12 tribes need to be more like the guys who flew the planes into the towers. We have to be more committed.
Wow. That's a hell of a fucking pitch. Like.
Yeah. And so at that point he went, I think I have to reassess my decisions. And he turned to his wife and said, I think we need to think about what we're doing. And she said, why?
Right.
This is great.
Yeah. Okay. So she was at the mindset of...
Yeah. And
we need to veer more into suicide bombing as well.
Yeah, I absolutely need to drive a truck full of explosives into a farmer's market.
Yeah. Right. So there is that... You do see a little bit of a fatwa element in there too, like a little bit of a... kamikaze attitude.
Oh, no. They would never do that. They were like, we have to be more, psychologically, we have to be more committed.
Yeah.
I don't think they'd ever do that, no.
Not until Armageddon when they have
Not until Armageddon when it's all on. And then it's just no.
Not until they have the soldiers. Not until they have how many...
Hey, you have to get 144 kids. That's a lot, right? So it's going to take a lot of time. And when you got that army, you can do anything.
Yeah, you go in.
You can do anything.
You might need a bit more in the States nowadays. I hope. Are they like those in the States particularly? Do they have a little bit of that American kind of militia in them? Or is it a bit more peaceful than that? It's not the Jefferson County. How do they go with guns and stuff?
I don't know. It's a good question. They just had a major fire. Right. Colorado's largest fire ever broke out on one of their properties and decimated something like 25,000 homes burnt down. It's the biggest fire in the history of that state.
Really?
And it started on their property. And they don't know what they were doing. They think that they were burning stuff in their furnaces.
Yeah, right.
And what they think, from members we spoke to in the States, they burn all sorts of stuff. Like they have a lot of stillbirths.
Yep.
Right.
What do you reckon they're burning?
Well, crematorium.
It's a crematorium.
Yeah.
So that was pretty hectic. Also, there's a couple of cult experts in the States we talked to, and we spend a lot of time with, really interesting old couple who've been around for ages. And they were saying a couple of years ago they had heard either an Australian cult member who was spending time in the States, who'd subsequently left, talking how he had heard talk of stockpiling munitions in Australia, or they weren't clear, but they said, he was talking about having heard in the group that they were stockpiling munitions. But they were like, I don't think that'd ever happen. They're not quite like that, but I don't know. You never know.
Well, I mean, 9 episodes in, we'll see. Maybe in episode 10, we'll discover the great plan to take back the South, or take back Picton anyway.
From all the property developers down there.
Well, no, Shannon Knowles, the only thing I know that come out of Picton outside of the 12 tribes.
Was he from Picton?
Well, he's living there now.
No, he was from Condo.
Yeah. Well, there's so much here. Do you think you're still uncovering stuff as you go?
There's going to be heaps more. There's going to be so much more. It's so interesting. And there's such a big story.
Well, 9 eps in, that's Inside the Tribe. You can get it wherever you find your podcasts on all respective platforms, respective platforms. Thank you for joining us today, Tim Elliott.
No, thanks guys for having me.
I'm going home now to go further inside the tribe.